Jane had always believed that love could heal everything. From the earliest moments of her life, she had associated love with warmth, protection, and a sense of belonging. She remembered sitting on the porch of her childhood home, watching couples walk by, imagining herself in their shoes, walking hand in hand with someone who would know her deepest fears, who would cherish her as she was, who would never let her feel small or forgot. As a child, she scribbled in her diary about her dreams of marriage: white gowns, smiling faces, laughter spilling like sunlight. And in her heart, she promised herself that when the time came, she would love fully, with nothing held back. Ethan entered her life during her college years, a quiet, observant presence with a kind smile that reached his eyes. Jane had noticed him in the library first, his head bent over books, fingers tracing the words as if the pages whispered secrets only he could hear. She didn't expect to meet someone who would change her world so completely. Their first conversation had been awkward but honest. He asked about her favorite authors, laughed at her jokes with an easy warmth, and listened when she spoke of her hopes and fears. Jane felt seen in a way she hadn't before, and she felt the tiny spark of possibility ignite in her chest. Their courtship unfolded like a delicate dance. They spent hours walking through city parks, their fingers brushing, hearts beating fast yet slowly, as if the universe had slowed time just for them. Ethan introduced her to quiet evenings with music, late-night talks that meandered between dreams and fears, and the kind of gentle affection that didn't demand perfection. Jane, in turn, showed him the colors of her world, her childhood memories, the poetry she loved, the tiny joys of ordinary life. They became inseparable, their love deepening with every shared secret, every stolen glance. By the time Ethan proposed, Jane felt as if their souls had already been intertwined for lifetimes. The proposal was simple: a quiet evening at the rooftop of his apartment, a small box containing a silver ring, and words that made her heart ache with joy. "Jane," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I want to spend every day making you smile, every night making you feel safe, every moment showing you how much I love you. Will you marry me?" Jane's hands shook as she whispered yes, tears spilling freely, feeling as though her entire life had led to this single, perfect moment. The months that followed were a whirlwind of planning, excitement, and nervous anticipation. Jane tried to focus on the joy surrounding her, the friends and family who came together to celebrate their love, the small details she had dreamed about since childhood, the flowers, the decorations, the gown that shimmered like sunlight. Yet, in quiet moments, a shadow crept at the edges of her mind. There were times when Ethan seemed distant, moments when his laughter didn't quite reach his eyes, silences that lingered too long. Jane dismissed them as pre-wedding nerves, convincing herself that love didn't always look perfect in every instant. She clung to the belief that what mattered was the promise they had made to each other, the bond that had carried them through years of companionship and devotion. The wedding day arrived with all the grandeur Jane had imagined. The sun rose in a golden haze, spilling warmth across the garden where the ceremony would take place. Jane's gown flowed like water, lace clinging softly to her skin, delicate flowers pinned in her hair. Her mother held her hand tightly as they walked through the morning chaos, a mixture of laughter, gentle scolding, and whispered advice. Jane smiled at her friends, thanking them for their presence, but her heart thudded with a nervous rhythm that matched the subtle tension she had carried for months. When the ceremony began, Jane felt a strange combination of elation and foreboding. Her father's hand in hers felt both grounding and transient, a reminder of love that had shaped her yet could not shield her from the choices she was about to make. As she walked down the aisle, her eyes met Ethan's, and for a fleeting moment, everything seemed right. His smile was warm, his gaze steady, and for a heartbeat, Jane allowed herself to believe in the life they were stepping into together. Vows were exchanged, rings slid onto fingers, and the kiss sealed promises that seemed eternal. The crowd erupted in applause, cheers that rang like music in Jane's ears. Yet beneath the joy, a tiny, persistent whisper lingered, an unease she could not ignore. The day proceeded in a blur: photographs, congratulations, laughter, and tears. Jane moved through it all, her smile perfect, her hand clasped firmly in Ethan's, though inside she felt a tremor she could not name. When the reception ended and guests had left, Jane and Ethan finally reached their honeymoon suite. The room was bathed in warm light, scented candles flickering softly, shadows dancing across the walls. Jane expected joy, warmth, and the magic of a dream realized. Ethan, however, entered holding a small box, his eyes avoiding hers. The air shifted, Jane's heart constricted. "Jane," he said softly, setting the box down, "there's something I need to show you." Jane's pulse quickened. "A gift?" she asked, forcing her voice light, though every instinct screamed that this was more than a simple present. "No," he replied, swallowing hard. "It's something important, something I should have told you long ago." Her hands trembled as he opened the box. Inside were letters, old, stacked neatly, every envelope addressed to him. Jane's breath caught as her eyes fell on the name written on each, Isabella. The woman who had been a part of Ethan's life before her, the one everyone believed was gone, the one whose absence had always lingered like a ghost. Jane unfolded a letter with shaking hands. The words leapt at her like a blow. "Ethan, I don't know how much time I have left, but if love could keep me alive, I swear I would never leave you." Tears blurred Jane's vision. Her heart ached with a sudden, unbearable weight. She had known Isabella had been important to Ethan, but she had never imagined that a love so profound could linger beyond death, that it could haunt the man she loved even now. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why are you showing me this?" "I couldn't hide it," he said, voice trembling. "I thought I had moved on, that I could love you fully, but part of my heart is still hers. I wanted to tell you before we began this life together. I couldn't let you marry me under false pretenses." Jane's knees buckled slightly. "So, you married me knowing?" "Yes," he said, tears slipping down his face. "I love you, Jane, I chose you, but I am not whole, and it isn't fair to you." The room seemed to tilt. Jane's dreams, her carefully constructed vision of happiness, collapsed in an instant. Her wedding night, the one she had fantasized about for years, was now the moment her heart shattered. I can't," she whispered. "I can't be with someone whose heart isn't fully mine." Ethan reached out, desperate. "Jane, please, I'll spend every day making it right. I'll love you the way you deserve, fully, completely, if you just give me a chance." Jane shook her head, tears streaming. "I can't wait. I can't start my life second to a ghost, second to someone who came before me. I can't live like this." The silence that followed was suffocating. Jane packed her dress, the veil, the jewelry, each movement trembling, fueled by heartbreak. Ethan sat on the couch, silent and broken. She turned to him one last time. "I loved you," she whispered, "and you weren't ready to love me back." She left the suite. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. She drove without looking back, tears blurring the world. Every streetlight seemed to echo the ache inside her, every shadow a reminder of the life she thought she had earned. By the time she reached her sister's home, Jane's body and soul felt like they had been hollowed out. She collapsed into her sister Maya's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The story poured out of her, every betrayal, every letter, every dream now in ruins. Maya held her through the night, whispering words of comfort, letting Jane grieve without restraint. Weeks turned into months. Jane threw herself into work, friends, and routines, trying desperately to fill the void. Every photograph, every memory of the wedding reminded her of what she had lost. Yet slowly, she began to find small fragments of strength. She discovered that survival did not mean ignoring pain. It meant facing it, learning from it, and allowing oneself to heal, even if scars remained. Evenings were the hardest. Alone in her apartment, Jane sometimes reached for her phone, imagining a call from Ethan, imagining apologies, imagining what could have been. The letters haunted her, reminders of love that existed before and beyond her. And yet she learned something vital. Love alone was not enough. Trust, timing, and honesty mattered just as much. Through the sorrow, Jane began to reclaim herself. Walks in the park, long cups of tea, conversations with friends, each moment reminded her that life continued. She wrote in journals, poured her pain into words that healed more than they hurt, and slowly, day by day, she stitched together the pieces of her heart. Jane never forgot Ethan or that night. She would always remember the weight of his confession, the ache of betrayal, the collapse of a dream she had held since childhood. But eventually, she learned that even broken hearts could beat again. She learned that strength often emerges from tragedy, and that the end of one story could be the beginning of a life reclaimed. The wedding night had changed everything. It had destroyed her illusions, her perfect dream, and yet, in the ruins, it had also given her something she hadn't expected herself. The weeks following that devastating night passed in a blur for Jane. Mornings began with a hollow routine, waking up, making herself a cup of tea she barely tasted, walking through her apartment that now felt like a space of echoes. Every corner reminded her of what should have been, the happiness she had imagined, the laughter she had expected, the life she had built in her mind long before she even met Ethan. She tried to focus on work, tasks that demanded her attention, the small triumphs that kept her occupied. Yet in the quiet moments, her mind wandered, drifting back to the letters, to Ethan's confession, to the haunting reality that the man she loved had never fully been hers. Her friends noticed the change. Her laughter was quieter, her smiles delayed, her eyes carrying a weight that had never been there before. "Jane, you need to let go," one friend said, concern etched on her face. Jane nodded politely, forcing a smile, but inside she felt no release. Letting go wasn't as simple as she had imagined. Love, after all, had left its mark, indelible and unrelenting. She realized that it wasn't just Ethan she had loved. It was the dream he represented, the idea of a life she had always longed for, the vision of herself as a wife, cherished and secure. That dream was now gone, ripped away in a single night. In the solitude of her apartment, Jane began to confront the layers of her grief. She thought about the early days of her courtship with Ethan, the moments when she had believed in the inevitability of their love. She remembered the way he had held her hand on their first date, how he had listened with patience, how his laughter had seemed to make the world itself lighter. The memories now were bittersweet, each one carrying both warmth and unbearable pain. She wondered if those moments had been real, or if they had simply been a prelude to the revelation that would shatter everything. One evening, she found herself standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. The world continued, indifferent to her heartbreak. Cars moved, people laughed, lights blinked, life went on. And yet, she felt frozen, as if she were suspended in a liminal space between what had been and what could never be. Her heart ached with a longing she could not satisfy, and tears fell silently down her cheeks. She whispered to herself, "I trusted you, I believed in us, and you weren't ready." Her sister Maya visited often, insisting Jane needed human connection, urging her to step outside, to breathe fresh air, to remind herself that life did not end with a broken engagement. But even in these moments, Jane felt a profound isolation. How could anyone understand the weight of a dream destroyed before it had a chance to bloom? How could they know the depth of trust she had given, the vulnerability she had offered, and the complete shattering that followed? Jane began writing again, pouring her emotions onto paper, crafting letters she would never send. Each word was a release, a small exorcism of the anguish lodged deep in her chest. She wrote about Ethan, about Isabella, about the life she had imagined and the reality she faced. The act of writing gave her a strange solace. It allowed her to acknowledge her pain without being consumed entirely by it. Each sentence became a lifeline, each paragraph a step toward reclaiming herself from the wreckage of heartbreak. As autumn settled in, Jane ventured outside more often. She walked through parks, letting the wind sting her cheeks, letting the crisp air fill her lungs with the rawness of life. The world was indifferent, yet she found beauty in its smallness. The rustling leaves, the laughter of children playing, the smell of damp earth after rain. She realized that life continued, and that perhaps in observing it, she could begin to stitch her own heart back together. But the nights remained the hardest. Alone in her apartment, Jane would sometimes find herself reaching for her phone, imagining a call from Ethan. She envisioned him apologizing, explaining, pleading for a second chance. Every imagined scenario carried both hope and despair. She hated herself for even entertaining the possibility, knowing deep down that some things could not be repaired. Trust, once broken in such a fundamental way, could not simply be rebuilt with words or gestures. One rainy evening, as Jane sat by her window with a notebook in her lap, she remembered a moment from her engagement party. Ethan had held her hand, speaking softly about the life they would build together. He had smiled, confident and tender, and Jane had believed that smile promised forever. Now, she realized that even then, part of him had been elsewhere, a part of his heart belonging to a ghost. The memory was both sweet and agonizing. It was a reminder that love can be deceptive, that intentions can be sincere yet incomplete, and that sometimes the heart is never entirely ours to claim. In the following weeks, Jane threw herself into work with renewed vigor. Her colleagues noticed the shift, a quiet strength emerging from the rawness of grief. She became meticulous, focused, almost untouchable in her dedication. And yet, beneath the surface, the ache remained, a quiet hum of sorrow that threaded through her thoughts. She knew that healing would not be linear, that it would ebb and flow, sometimes leaving her in despair, sometimes allowing brief glimpses of peace. Jane began to attend therapy, a space where she could confront her emotions without fear of judgment. She spoke of Ethan, of Isabella, of the wedding night that had upended her life. Each session peeled back layers of pain, revealing resilience she hadn't realized she possessed. She discovered that heartbreak, while devastating, could also be transformative. It forced her to reevaluate her understanding of love, trust, and self-worth. She learned that survival was not passive. It required courage, the courage to face the void and take steps forward, however tentative. Friends continued to support her, organizing small gatherings, dinners, and outings. Jane smiled, laughed, and engaged, though always with a tinge of caution. She realized that she would never be the same woman who had walked down the aisle with stars in her eyes and dreams of a perfect life. But she also realized that change did not have to mean loss entirely. In rebuilding her life, she discovered facets of herself she had neglected: independence, self-reliance, and the capacity for joy even amidst sorrow. One afternoon, while walking through a quiet park, Jane paused by a bench, watching leaves swirl in the wind. She thought of Ethan, of the love she had offered so freely, and of the life that had been denied to her. The pain was still there, raw and persistent, but so too was a growing sense of clarity. She understood that her value was not diminished by someone else's inability to love fully. She understood that she could honor her heart without surrendering it entirely. In the months that followed, Jane began to explore new passions. She joined a local art class, painting landscapes and portraits that reflected both her sorrow and her resilience. She volunteered at a community center, helping children discover their own creativity and confidence. Each small act of engagement with the world around her became a thread in the tapestry of her healing. The world, once threatening and cold, now offered glimpses of beauty she had overlooked. Yet even as Jane moved forward, memories of the wedding night haunted her. She could see the letters, feel the weight of Ethan's confession, relive the moment she had left the suite in tears. Those memories were scars, but they were also teachers. They reminded her of the importance of self-respect, of the necessity of honesty, and of the fragility of love when it is incomplete. Through it all, Jane learned to embrace her solitude without fear. She discovered that being alone did not equate to loneliness. Rather, it allowed her to rediscover her own voice, her own desires, and her own dreams. She began to write more intentionally, chronicling her journey, expressing her grief, and celebrating the small victories of self-reclamation. Each word she wrote was an affirmation. She was still whole, still capable, still worthy of love that would be undivided. By the end of the year, Jane had transformed. The woman who had once been broken on her wedding night now carried herself with quiet strength. She smiled genuinely, laughed freely, and faced the world with eyes that had seen sorrow but refused to be consumed by it. The pain of the past remained, etched into her soul, but it no longer defined her. She had survived, and in surviving, she had learned the profound truth that sometimes the end of one dream is the beginning of a life reclaimed. The wedding night had changed everything. It had destroyed illusions, fractured trust, and shattered expectations. But in the wreckage, Jane discovered herself. She learned that heartbreak, while devastating, could be a catalyst for growth. She learned that love is not always enough, that timing is crucial, and that the heart, though fragile, can endure even the deepest wounds. And so, Jane moved forward, carrying both sorrow and strength, walking through life with a heart that had loved, lost, and learned. The memory of Ethan, of the letters, and of the wedding night remained, a quiet reminder of what had been and what would never be, but it no longer controlled her. She had emerged from tragedy not unscathed, but unbroken, a woman who understood the true cost of love and the immeasurable value of self-respect. As winter melted into spring, Jane began to notice subtle shifts within herself. The pain from that fateful night still lingered, like a dull ache under her ribs, but it no longer consumed her every thought. She had learned to live with the memory of Ethan and the ghost of Isabella, carrying them as a part of her past rather than letting them dictate her present. Slowly, she allowed herself to breathe again, to hope again, and most importantly, to reclaim her sense of self. Jane immersed herself further into her work, taking on projects that challenged her intellect and creativity. Each task she completed became a small affirmation of her strength. Her colleagues admired her dedication, noting the calm resilience that now seemed to radiate from her. They didn't know the depths of the heartbreak she had endured, the nights spent staring at the ceiling, her heart aching with unspoken grief. But they saw the result, a woman who carried herself with grace despite invisible scars, who smiled even when it cost her something to do so. One afternoon, while walking through a local art exhibit, Jane found herself drawn to a painting of a stormy sea. The waves were violent, yet beautiful, and the artist had captured both chaos and serenity in a single frame. Jane lingered, staring at the brushstrokes, feeling a strange kinship with the scene. Life, she realized, was like that stormy sea, unpredictable, sometimes cruel, yet capable of revealing beauty in its turbulence. The painting reminded her that strength was forged in adversity and that the heart, even when battered, could learn to navigate the waves. During this period, Jane began reconnecting with friends she had drifted away from during the chaos of her wedding and heartbreak. She met for coffee, attended small gatherings, and slowly rebuilt her social world. Conversations were often light, sometimes filled with laughter, but beneath the surface, Jane carried a quiet awareness of her resilience. She had survived a betrayal that could have destroyed her, and in that survival, she had discovered new dimensions of herself. Yet the past was never far from her mind. On quiet nights, she would sometimes find herself imagining Ethan's life without her, wondering if he thought of her as much as she thought of him. There was a pang of sorrow in these thoughts, a recognition that love had been imperfect, that hearts could be devoted yet divided, that promises could crumble despite the best intentions. Jane allowed herself these reflections, not as a means of lingering in grief, but as a way to honor her own journey, to acknowledge the depth of her feelings without being overwhelmed by them. One evening, Jane received a call from a distant cousin, inviting her to participate in a community project aimed at helping young women develop life skills and confidence. Jane hesitated at first, uncertain if she had the emotional energy to invest in others while still managing her own healing. But something inside her, the part that had survived heartbreak and emerged stronger, urged her to accept. She agreed, attending the first workshop with a mixture of nervousness and cautious optimism. The experience was transformative. Jane discovered that guiding others, sharing her insights, and offering encouragement not only helped the participants but also nourished her own spirit. She realized that pain, while deeply personal, could also become a source of empathy and connection. She began to see her heartbreak not merely as a wound, but as a wellspring of understanding that allowed her to help others navigate their own struggles. Meanwhile, Jane continued to write, her journals filling with reflections on love, betrayal, resilience, and hope. She chronicled the journey from the wedding night to the present, exploring the complexity of emotions she had experienced. Each entry became a testament to her growth, a record of her evolving understanding of the human heart. Through writing, she processed the pain she had endured and transformed it into insight and clarity. During this time, Jane met someone new, a fellow participant in one of the community projects. His name was Daniel, a gentle and thoughtful man with a quiet strength that reminded her of herself. He didn't rush her, didn't expect anything beyond friendship at first. He simply listened, shared stories, and offered a steady presence that was comforting in its simplicity. Jane felt a spark of connection, cautious yet undeniable, a reminder that life could offer unexpected joys even after immense loss. Their friendship developed slowly, grounded in mutual respect and understanding. Jane found herself laughing more easily, sharing thoughts she had long kept guarded, and feeling a sense of companionship that was free from the weight of past betrayals. Daniel's presence didn't erase the memory of Ethan, nor did it diminish the pain she had endured. Instead, it provided a safe space for healing, a reminder that the heart could expand again, even after devastation. Yet, even with Daniel's friendship, Jane's nights were sometimes haunted by echoes of her past. She would lie awake, remembering the wedding night, the letters, Ethan's confession, and the collapse of her dreams. These memories were painful, but she faced them with a new strength. She acknowledged the hurt, let herself cry when necessary, and then returned to the present, refusing to let sorrow dominate her life. Over time, the memories became less of a torment and more of a reminder of her resilience, a testament to the woman she had become. As spring deepened into summer, Jane began to venture further into the world, traveling to nearby towns, exploring parks, attending cultural events. Each outing was a small act of reclamation, a declaration that she would not be imprisoned by her past. She discovered that joy, even in small doses, was possible. She found pleasure in the warmth of sunlight on her skin, the sound of birdsong, the laughter of children, the simple satisfaction of a day well lived. Through it all, Jane remained committed to her own growth. She continued to write, to teach, to guide, to explore. She nurtured friendships, cultivated her passions, and allowed herself moments of quiet reflection. She began to understand that healing was not about erasing pain, but about integrating it into a life that continued to move forward. Each day, each choice, each small victory reinforced her sense of self and her capacity for love and joy. One evening, as Jane walked along a quiet riverbank, she paused to watch the water flow. The current moved relentlessly, carrying with it debris and leaves, reflecting the colors of the sky as it shifted from orange to deep blue. She realized that life, much like the river, moved forward regardless of obstacles, carrying memories, lessons, and experiences along with it. She had been swept into a torrent of grief and betrayal, yet she had emerged on the other side, scarred but unbroken, stronger than she had ever imagined. Jane understood in that quiet moment that the wedding night had indeed changed everything. It had shattered her illusions, destroyed a dream she had held since childhood, and forced her to confront the fragility of trust and the complexity of love. But it had also given her a gift, the opportunity to discover herself, to cultivate resilience, to find joy in unexpected places, and to build a life that was fully her own. Her journey was far from over. She knew that love could still enter her life, that new experiences could shape her heart, that the wounds of the past could coexist with hope for the future. Jane had learned that the heart, while delicate, was also remarkably strong. It could endure betrayal, heartbreak, and loss, and yet still have the capacity to embrace life with courage, curiosity, and grace. In the months that followed, Jane continued to grow, to explore, and to heal. She embraced the beauty of ordinary days, the comfort of friendships, the satisfaction of meaningful work, and the quiet joy of self-discovery. The memory of Ethan and that fateful night remained, a reminder of the fragility of dreams and the necessity of resilience, but it no longer defined her. Jane had reclaimed her life, her heart, and her sense of self. By the end of Part 3, Jane stood as a woman transformed. She had faced unimaginable sorrow, endured betrayal, and navigated the storm of heartbreak with courage. She had discovered strength in her solitude, hope in her friendships, and clarity in her reflections. The wedding night had changed everything, yes, but it had also set her on a path towards self-realization, empowerment, and the possibility of future happiness. By the time summer fully unfolded, Jane had transformed into a woman who moved through life with quiet determination. The pain of the past still lingered like a shadow at the edges of her heart, but it no longer dictated her steps. She had learned to carry her heartbreak with grace, to honor her experiences without letting them imprison her, and to embrace the possibility of new beginnings. Every morning, she woke with a sense of purpose, a recognition that she was no longer defined by loss, but by her resilience and her capacity to rebuild. Her work with the community center had grown, evolving from occasional workshops to a full mentorship program for young women. Jane poured herself into this project, guiding others not only through practical skills, but also through lessons of self-respect, confidence, and emotional intelligence. The young women she mentored reminded her of herself, full of hope, dreams, and vulnerability. Teaching them, listening to their fears, celebrating their small victories, Jane discovered a healing she hadn't anticipated. By helping others reclaim their confidence and strength, she reclaimed pieces of herself that had once felt lost in grief. Daniel remained a constant presence in her life. Their friendship had blossomed slowly, built on shared experiences, mutual understanding, and patience. Jane valued the absence of pressure in their relationship. Daniel never asked for more than she could give. He offered companionship, laughter, and empathy. Slowly, Jane felt herself opening to the possibility of love again. It wasn't a rush, nor a replacement for what she had lost, but a gentle, steady light that reminded her heart it could still beat freely, without fear. One crisp morning, Jane and Daniel took a walk along a tree-lined avenue, the sunlight filtering through branches like golden threads. They spoke of simple things, books, music, dreams, but there was an undercurrent of understanding between them, a shared knowledge of past wounds and cautious hope for the future. Jane realized that healing did not require forgetting, that love could enter a life without erasing the past. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known since the wedding night, a fragile yet undeniable sense of security and belonging. As the year progressed, Jane reflected often on Ethan, the wedding night, and the letters that had upended her dreams. The initial anger and despair had softened into sorrow, acceptance, and understanding. She realized that Ethan's confession, though devastating, had also been an act of honesty. It had forced her to confront reality, to recognize that love is not always complete or timely, and to take responsibility for her own happiness rather than relying on another's capacity to provide it. She had emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of her own needs and boundaries. In quiet moments, Jane would sit by the riverbank, watching the water flow endlessly. She thought about the years ahead, imagining herself living fully, embracing opportunities, and loving without reservation, but also with discernment. She understood that trust was precious, that emotional safety was vital, and that self-respect was the foundation for any meaningful relationship. The memory of Ethan lingered, yes, but it no longer held power over her choices. It was part of her story, not the entirety of it. Jane also began to revisit the dreams she had once shelved. She enrolled in an advanced writing course, eager to transform her journals and reflections into stories that could inspire others. Writing had always been a sanctuary, but now it became a mission. She wrote about resilience, heartbreak, and personal growth, blending her experiences with fictional narratives that captured the complexity of love and loss. Her words resonated with readers, many of whom reached out to share their own stories of betrayal and healing. Through writing, Jane realized that her pain had not been wasted. It had become a bridge for connection, empathy, and understanding. One autumn afternoon, Jane received a message from an old friend, someone who had known Ethan before she did. The message was cautious, almost hesitant, inquiring about her well-being. Jane read it and felt a fleeting pang of emotion, a mixture of curiosity, closure, and residual hurt. She decided not to respond immediately, taking time to reflect. Eventually, she crafted a reply that was honest yet detached, acknowledging the past without allowing it to disturb her present. This small act symbolized a critical moment of mastery over her emotions. She could remember without reliving, acknowledge without being controlled, and recognize without being diminished. Daniel remained by her side through these moments, offering quiet support and companionship. Jane valued his patience, his understanding, and his refusal to rush her into decisions about love or the future. Their relationship grew organically, a steady bloom of connection and trust. Jane allowed herself to hope again, not with the naive expectation of perfection, but with the mature understanding that love could be nurturing, patient, and healing if approached with honesty and respect. Months passed, and Jane began to feel a renewed sense of autonomy. She traveled, explored new hobbies, and strengthened her friendships. She revisited places she had once loved but had avoided after her heartbreak, experiencing them anew with a sense of curiosity and joy. Life, she realized, was not about clinging to what had been lost, but embracing what remained and what could be created. One evening, while teaching a workshop on emotional resilience, Jane shared a personal story, not the explicit details of her wedding night, but the essence of heartbreak, trust, and recovery. The young women listened intently, some with tears, others with nods of understanding. Jane saw in their eyes the same struggle she had faced, the difficulty of reclaiming oneself after betrayal. As she spoke, she felt a sense of purpose solidify within her. She had transformed pain into wisdom, grief into guidance, and sorrow into empowerment. Her journey, though born of tragedy, had created a path that could illuminate the way for others. By the following spring, Jane felt a sense of equilibrium. She had reconciled with her past, embraced her present, and looked forward to the future. The wedding night remained a defining moment, yes, but it was no longer a prison. It was a catalyst, a lesson, a reminder of the strength inherent in survival and the beauty that could emerge from loss. Jane and Daniel's relationship deepened with time. They traveled together, explored shared interests, and supported each other's individual growth. Jane realized that love, when approached with clarity, respect, and patience, could flourish without fear of repeating past mistakes. She felt gratitude for the slow unfolding of connection, recognizing that her heartbreak had prepared her to appreciate a love that was healthy, steady, and reciprocal. Eventually, Jane returned to the city where her wedding had taken place, visiting the venue not to relive the trauma, but to reclaim the space for herself. She walked through the empty halls, remembering the emotions, the vows, and the heartbreak. And yet she felt no pain, not the old, raw ache that had once consumed her, but a quiet acknowledgement. She had survived, she had grown, and she had emerged with a heart stronger and wiser than before. On a warm summer evening, Jane stood on a hill overlooking the city. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the buildings and streets. She breathed deeply, feeling the wind on her face and the rhythm of her own heartbeat. The wedding night had changed everything, yes, but it had also given her a gift she had never expected. The knowledge that she was whole on her own, capable of love, capable of joy, and capable of creating a life rich with meaning and possibility. Jane smiled, not with the innocence of the girl who had dreamed of a perfect wedding, but with the profound confidence of a woman who had faced devastation and emerged stronger. She had learned that heartbreak could be transformative, that betrayal could teach resilience, and that the heart, though fragile, could endure and flourish again. As the city lights twinkled below, Jane felt a sense of completion. She had said goodbye to illusions, embraced her reality, and stepped boldly into her future. The memory of Ethan and that wedding night would always be a part of her, but it no longer held her captive. Jane was free, free to love, free to grow, and free to live fully. The wedding night had indeed changed everything. It had destroyed dreams, shattered trust, and forced her into unimaginable pain. But it had also revealed her strength, resilience, and capacity for transformation. Jane had emerged from tragedy not merely as a survivor, but as a woman fully alive, fully aware, and fully capable of embracing the beauty of life in all its complexity. And in that freedom, Jane finally understood the true power of love, not as something that must be given or received perfectly, but as something that exists within, nurtured by courage, self-respect, and the unyielding determination to live fully, regardless of the scars that history leaves behind.